A woman gets too close to a polar bear cage. Now she's fighting for her life.
I thought the bear was eating her.
Terror in the deep. A moray eel is in a deadly tug-of-war with a diver.
He just had to...
Killer whales are on the hunt. And this stranded seal doesn't stand a chance.
Oh, God, no!
And later, disaster on the racetrack. Then, a terrified boy goes into a frozen lake to save his dog. Now he's in deep trouble. And a man tries to breathe life back into a baby deer.
Come on, guys, come on.
Wild, uncensored, raw. Heart-stopping animal encounters caught on tape by everyday people. From all over the world. Groundbreaking computer graphics will show you exactly what happened. And meet the survivors.
I just thought, this is the end of me. I'm just going to die.
All on Untamed and Uncut. Blood-curdling screams from an Anchorage, Alaska zoo.
I heard on the hedges a lot of horrified screaming.
It was obvious that something quite dramatic and frightening was happening.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Zoo visitors, Phyllis Kluge and Dr. Larry Rayford, rush with cameras rolling to the horrific sounds coming from the polar bear cage. They are utterly terrified by what they see.
And what I saw was absolutely amazing. There were 15 or 20 bystanders standing by the railing in various stages of shock and disbelief. One person actually fainted.
Can somebody call?
Somebody's coming. Catherine's thigh was thoroughly engulfed in Binky's enormous jaws.
In the clutches and jaws of Binky, a nearly 1,000-pound male polar bear, is 29-year-old Catherine Warburton from Sydney, Australia.
When I first saw her and realized what was going on, I started shaking. I was very fearful and very uncomfortable. I couldn't even look at it because I was so afraid of seeing something horrible. I thought the bear was eating her from the toes up because her legs were through the bar and he was growling. And he had his paws around her legs and was chewing on her.
Catherine had jumped over two low-lying barricades, hoping to get a close-up photo of Binky in his cage. Instead, Binky got the close-up.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Catherine looked semi-conscious. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't thrashing at all. The zookeepers were pummeling the bear with these very flimsy branches to no effect.
It's a terrifying tug-of-war between Binky, the zookeepers, and rescuers trying to free Catherine from the bear's deadly grip.
He didn't pay any attention to the men walloping him. He was very intent on eating Catherine.
Binky has plunged his canines directly into Catherine's left thigh. A polar bear's canines are longer, sharper, and spaced wider apart than in other bears. That extra space allows them to grasp and tear without interference from other teeth.
He had his teeth deep within her flesh, and her lower leg was actually in the cage.
Can somebody call?
Somebody's coming.
Binky's canines are dangerously close to the main femoral artery in Catherine's leg. Larry, a medical doctor, knows there is not much time left.
Knowing the anatomy of the body, and especially the lower extremities, I think Catherine was perhaps an inch or two away from death.
I don't want you. I don't know. You come on with me.
Everybody that was holding on to her was pulling her back, but they weren't pulling her back too hard because the bear was pulling on the other end.
Rescuers know if they pulled too hard, the bear could literally rip her in half.
When you're in the midst of such a brutal and shocking attack, it seems like it lasts for hours.
They don't have a tranquilizer gun?
Zookeepers have rushed to get a tranquilizer gun.
Get a gun! Tranquilizer gun!
I was the one that screamed, "Get a tranquilizer gun." Because it didn't make sense to me that they should keep hitting the bear with leaves when he wasn't responding. But I really didn't see any zookeepers around at that point.
But it will take 20 minutes to load the dart and another 15 minutes for the drug to take effect. By then, Catherine could be dead. Frustrated rescuers near the cage simply yell and continue to thrash Binky.
And then a man lifted up a wooden bench and started to climb over the wall with it. I guess he intended to try to hit the bear's paws or something on the cage.
Then, just as quickly as it started, suddenly Binky just lets go.
The bear at some point was just tired of the whole experience, and he opened his mouth, I believe, to yawn, and they were just able to pull her away at that moment.
Don't stay down, lay down, lay down. Lay down. Lay down.
Finally free of the bear's powerful paws, no one knows for sure if Catherine's injuries will be fatal.
How did she get down there? She walked down there?
She is rushed to the hospital, where it's determined the bear narrowly missed hitting her femoral artery. She did, however, suffer broken bones and torn ligaments in her left leg, but at least she's alive.
I just cried out to God and said, "Oh, please, God, I'll do whatever you want. Just take me away from this bear. Drop my foot, drop my leg, don't let me go, because I just can't take the pain anymore." And instantly, the bear dropped my foot.
She describes how she jumped over 2 short fences to get a picture of Binky and ended up in his clutches.
It was a cage that was very open, and when I was looking at it, it was just over my waist high. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. And then as I was looking towards the actual fence, there was another very short fence that was just in front. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. If I could just sit on that fence over there, I could get a great photo. So I kind of just went over to where the short rail was, and I was sitting on that little fence, and before I knew it, he was already on me.
As she stood in front of the chain-link fence just 4 feet from the main cage, with her camera to her eye, her peripheral vision was impaired.
I felt I was 5 feet away because it seemed a long way, and when the bear had stretched its arm right through the cage, because it had very, very long arms.
Binky was able to stretch his agile arm through the 8-inch space between the bars and use his oversized webbed paws to grab the unsuspecting woman, pulling her tight to the cage.
It was horrific. It was like a dog with a bone. I was like, my leg was a bone. And it crunched through my legs. I didn't feel anything then because the leg had been so damaged through what he'd been doing and gnawing on it. I thought, this is the end of me. I'm just going to die.
Had Binky severed her femoral artery or some other vital structure in her thigh, she could have easily bled to death before anyone could have saved her.
Don't stay down, lay down, lay down, lay down.
The nearly 4-inch puncture wound left a serious scar on Catherine's left leg.
I have a lot of sensation that's been lost in my leg.
Despite her injuries, Catherine admits Binky was only acting in the way Mother Nature intended for him.
From my experience, I think even if it's a polar bear, still keep your distance.
And she realizes now just how important it is to read the signs on zoo barriers that say, "Keep out." Samilan Islands, Thailand. Emma, a 7-foot moray eel, puts on a spectacular show for divers Matt Butcher and Bex Herbert.
Emma is a very famous eel. I mean, everybody that knows about diving in the Samilan Islands will know Emma. Everybody talks about her before we go down. Everybody has heard of her. She lives up to her character. She's a very famous, flamboyant moray eel, basically. Yeah, she's very well known around Thailand.
An underwater video camera documents their playful time with her
You can put your hand out and she'll come up and swim around your fingers, and she just basically comes up, nudges.
Emma has a home under this table coral, but she's easily lured by the sight of humans. They've been feeding her for months, and she welcomes the sausage snacks Matt and Bex have brought along.
Matt put his in a plastic bag and then put his in his pocket. And we literally got in as quick as we could to get to her before other people were getting to her.
The moray eel has a superior sense of smell to make up for its weak vision. Emma quickly picks up the scent and gently snags at the sausage from Matt's hand. She hardly seems threatening, and biologist Rita Mehta says that's not surprising.
Morays are way more scared of us than we are of them.
But on this day, something provokes Emma.
Matt was having some problems getting the sausages out of the plastic bag, couldn't open it properly.
While Matt is struggling to open the bag, Emma becomes increasingly irritated. Her focus is on one thing.
What Matt was feeding her was pretty much popcorn-sized pieces. She could eat a lot more. So she seemed pretty hungry by the video.
Matt tries to tap Emma's nose and push her away, but the agitated eel is even more determined to get at the sausage. But it's not the sausage she sinks her teeth into. Listen carefully. Matt is screaming in agony. His left thumb is in the grip of Emma's jaw.
He had 2 fingers in her mouth trying to open her mouth, but she just locked down even harder, and she started shaking her head quite aggressively.
Bex watches in horror as blood pours into the water. It's a deadly invitation in the shark-infested waters, and Emma is not letting go.
Morays do something called rotational feeding. They will spin their bodies or rotate their bodies around. That gives them this extra torque to remove a chunk off from a larger piece.
Finally, the awful sound that Bex can hear, even 45 feet underwater.
She just had and the thumb came off. And it was quite a shock.
That click was the sound of Matt's thumb. Emma's powerful teeth had snapped it off like a twig.
She literally swallowed the thumb in whole. It just went down like it was nothing.
It was no surprise that Emma could rip off Matt's thumb and swallow it with such ease.
So what I want you to notice here is the moray skull it's extraordinary. It's elongate and it's highly fused, which help make morays a very effective biter. Also, morays have a very long lower jaw.
The long lower jaw allows the moray to close its mouth quickly. The teeth are built to hang on tight for a long time.
You can see these very sharp, recurved teeth, and they're all up along the lower jaw, and they line that top jaw as well. Take a look at the ventral side of the upper part of the skull, and look at how long and sharp these teeth are. These are the teeth that the morays use to pierce their prey with. When a moray bites its food, its sharp, recurved teeth hook into the prey's body. And this makes it very difficult for the prey to struggle and get out of the moray's bite.
But the most fascinating characteristic of the moray eel sounds like something you'd see in a horror movie. These eels are the only aquatic vertebrae known for having a second set of jaws to actually swallow prey. It's astonishing machinery. The moray eel has one set of jaws in the oral cavity and another behind its skull. The front jaw bites the prey, and the back jaw projects forward, grabs the prey, and transports it back to the esophagus.
A completely novel mechanism of prey transport.
After hearing the eel's bite, Bex knew she had to get Matt to the surface in a hurry.
I obviously didn't want him to go in shock. I thought that if Matt loses any more blood, he's not going to make it.
2 divers frantically rush by boat. with only a towel to control the massive bleeding. But a hospital is more than an hour away. For Matt, it seemed like an eternity.
Blood was actually fountaining out of my thumb, like a good 12 inches or something. So I was quite worried, yeah, about the loss of blood.
He did survive, but 3 years later, the violent face-off with Emma is still a frightening, vivid image for Matt Butcher.
Emotionally, it was so surreal. It was like disbelief. I think I was in a little bit of shock.
What did send Emma into such a vicious frenzy? The same docile eel who gladly let humans feed her for nearly a year. Turns out, that is exactly the problem.
Emma may have been relying on people at this point for food. So who knows when the last time Emma was fed?
Feeding animals in the wild alters their natural behavior.
They might get lazy, they might stop hunting because they're waiting for the next human to come along to feed them. When you feed animals in the wild, they easily associate humans with food, and they become more aggressive towards humans.
In spite of the bloody matchup with Emma the eel, Matt is functioning quite normally. Thanks to an extraordinary Bangkok medical team that attached one of Matt's toes to his hand.
They cut my arm open and connected all the bones and nerves and tendons so I could have feeling and use the muscles and move it like a normal thumb.
Life and death drama unfolds when Jean stopped to help a mule deer that had been hit by a car on a California freeway. He knew right away that she would never survive her injuries.
The bottom line is she needs to be put down just so she'd be out of misery.
I was kind of depressed because it was a beautiful animal.
CHP officer Greg Mollendor helps euthanize the doe, but it's immediately apparent this is no time for mourning. Within 10 seconds, the deer's abdomen starts moving, and Jean realizes she's pregnant with twins.
It was minimal at first, and then I guess from either the shock or oxygen deprivation, the fawns became active. I mean, violently active.
The fetuses are in distress, and the clock is ticking. When a pregnant deer passes away, the air that keeps the fetus alive inside the placenta sac is cut off. Without that supply of oxygen, the heart and other organs begin to shut down. And then, just like a drowning person, the fetus will put up a struggle before passing out.
I was walking away. He said, you know, I saw some movement in the abdomen. Can I try to deliver? And I turned to him and I said, let's give it a rest, would you? And then he said, well, another couple of minutes and it won't make any difference because there won't be enough oxygen to support life. And I said, well, do what you got to do.
Jean has only seconds to grab a utility knife from his truck and cut open the deer's womb. His years of experience growing up on a farm are suddenly put to the test.
I cut open the deer, and the fawns immediately fell out, and I tore open the placenta and sac to let the one breathe, and it wasn't doing real well.
The fawns are limp and lifeless. It's been too long. It's clear one of the fawns won't make it, but Jean hasn't lost hope. His instincts take over, and he starts mouth-to-nose resuscitation on the second newborn.
Come on, guy.
When I got the fawn out of the birth sac, it wasn't breathing. It was just still. But it looked healthy.
Come on, babe. Come on, babe. Come on, guy.
Jean Chaffin has never done mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on a deer before, but he knows it's the fawn's only chance.
So I just grabbed his whole nose and put it over in my mouth and blew into it a little bit.
Doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on an animal is virtually the same as doing it on a human. But instead of pinching the nose and blowing into the mouth, with an animal, you close the mouth to form an airtight seal, and you blow into the nose.
Come on, look at this. Come on.
I didn't know if it was going to do it or not, but at least made the try.
Hey, what a great idea. I mean, the same thing you do with a little human baby, perhaps. You know, you cover the nose and the mouth, and he did it, and it worked.
He's breathing. He's breathing. All right.
But this newborn's not out of the woods yet.
I knew on the farm from cattle that, you know, the first milk from the mother is important.
A baby gets its antibodies from a mother's first milk, called colostrum. So using a bottle cap, Jean scoops up milk from the mother's milk sac and tries to feed the fawn.
What better way to help give this fawn a better chance to survive than to use the mother's milk? It was just terrific.
Within minutes, the 6.5-pound fawn is feeling strong and struggling to stand.
It was like turning on a light switch. It was working. It was great. It was standing. It was ready to run. It was active. So it was pretty exciting, I'll admit. It was an exciting time.
Hey, he's ready. Ready to listen. Ready. Let me out of here.
Jean names the spindly-legged fawn Freeway.
Freeway.
Just a beautiful animal. Just tears your heart out to see, now you got this little fawn with no mom. So, looked at me and said, "Are you my mother?"
My first thought was, she's not going to make it.
Mary Faust, a wildlife rescuer, agreed to take Freeway that day.
Normally, I have birds. A deer is a whole nother story because they have to be taken care of by their mom for a good 2 weeks. They have to be stimulated by their moms, cleaned, and it's not like a bird where you can just change their nest. These animals have to be cared for 24 hours a day, and that's why they have the mom, so I'm their substitute mom.
But Mary felt the fawn had been through so much stress, it might not survive.
We didn't know what to do with a fawn, but my instincts took over. Being a mom of 3, I knew that babies needed colostrum, so the sheriffs did a round robin, and they were able to get some colostrum from a goat in another part of the county.
Freeway defied the odds, surviving that first night and many others.
I thought she was healthy because she started walking around the backyard, and she was interested and curious in everything. She started gaining weight. She was eating. She had a great appetite. She just flourished.
Freeway was eventually released into a deer herd in the Descanso Mountains of California. Winter in the Antarctic Peninsula. Tom and Sharon Merritt are aboard a tour ship, and the sights are breathtaking. Suddenly, over the loudspeaker, the announcement they'd hoped for.
Orca spotted.
The Merritts and the rest of the passengers race to the ship's bridge level. What they witness is an event so rare, it's been documented by scientists only 13 times. And never photographed.
These orca are going to attack this seal.
A family of orcas has set its sights on a crab-eater seal resting on an ice floe.
Depending on where you go around the world, orca have culture. And the definition of culture is things that are passed on within your social peers or your family groups.
Whale biologist Dr. Ingrid Visser says the different orca cultures, much like different human cultures, have varying diets depending on where they live.
So, for instance, in Norway, they would specialise in feeding on herrings. In New Zealand, they specialise in feeding on sharks and stingrays. In Antarctica, this particular type of orca, the type Bs, specialise in hunting for seals and making these waves.
Dr. Visser says this form of seal hunting is so unusual and possibly new, it has no official name.
We've just called it wave making.
It's possible that these orca may be one social group or pod.
We think that it's the same group of orca that's doing it again and again because it's a very specialised behaviour and it takes many years to learn how to do it.
Watch as the orcas raise their massive 8-ton bodies vertically to peek over the ice floe. Dr. Visser says the movement is called spy hopping.
When the orca lift their heads out of the water, they're actually having a look around to see what's above the surface.
The orca's synchronized stalking routine has only just begun.
They've been breaking the ice off and swimming around him.
The orcas determine the ice floe is too big. They use the weight of their massive 16,000-pound bodies to chip away at the ice.
The ice floe was about 25 feet square, but it kept getting smaller, I think, through the action of the orca.
And it appears they don't like the location of the floe either. The orcas attempt to isolate it from nearby floes.
They're twisting the ice.
7/8 of the ice floe is actually below the surface. But these behemoth creatures are able to use their strength to strategically position the flow.
They spin the ice around and they move other pieces of ice away so that they can line it up perfectly to make the biggest wave possible.
Prepare yourself for this monstrous but brilliantly executed attack on the powerless seal. This highly sophisticated hunting technique is used mostly to help teach young calves how to hunt. Using her blowhole, the matriarch of the pod sends out vocal signals to summon other adult orcas to line up perfectly and then charge the ice, swimming at speeds up to 35 miles an hour.
When the orca came in parallel toward the flow, they then submerged, causing the flow to rock one direction and then the other.
The wave created hurls the doomed seal to the other end, where a hungry orca anticipates a fresh meal.
I felt sorry for the seal because there was no way it could hide from the orca. At the same time, I was astounded with the obvious intentional action of the orca.
Oh, here they come, two of them. Look at underneath there. You can see them underneath.
The helpless seal is pummeled by another wave-hunting attack and manages to elude the determined predators once again.
One of the things I thought about as I was watching the event unfold is that how helpless the seal was and how trapped he must have felt.
The orcas are relentless. They continue wave hunting and spy hopping.
They're going to tear up the panel.
But now they're planning a new strategy. They bring in reinforcements. At least 5 members of this predatory pod stage a new wave of gang attack on this terrified seal.
His fate was sealed. He had no choice. He had no means of defense or escape.
And they duck underneath the ice.
Actually see how the wave created by the crafty orca will simply slide the seal off the flow.
It's all over.
No, not quite.
Yeah, it's all over.
Or is it?
We watched and watched, which we learned is a good idea. Keep watching. And we saw about 10 seconds later the seal reappear.
The whale watchers let out a collective gasp. The seal has reemerged on another ice floe close by. Ingrid Visser says the orca put the seal back on the ice for a reason.
It was very clear to me that this was a training session. They were teaching their young how to make the waves and how to get the seal off the ice so that they could eat it.
Visser says one juvenile and one very young calf were watching as the adults pursued the seal.
Subsequent to them putting it back on the ice, they made another wave, and one of the young ones was involved in that. When they got it back into the water for the last time, they then ate the seal. So the young ones got a reward.
It's the prestigious Prédaté in Montreal, Canada. These magnificent animals resemble thoroughbreds, but are more muscular, with shorter legs and a longer body.
The standardbred animal has evolved, and it's been a relatively young breed, but it's evolved now to the point where our average horse is probably 63 to, say, 67 inches tall. Weight's going to run from 850 pounds to maybe up to 1250.
They are built to pull carts called sulkies up to 35 miles an hour.
The standardbred starts racing at 2 years old. Horses can race up to 14 years of age, so there's a wide range, but most of your stake races involve horses at ages of 2 and 3.
Banker Blue Chip, a 2-year-old colt, had been harness racing for only a few months.
Banker at the time was not quite as refined as a lot of horses we have nowadays, but in the races, he was tough.
Trainer Joe Holloway had high hopes Banker Blue Chip would end up in the winner's circle this day.
A horse trainer doesn't actually have to train a horse to race. That's pretty well bred into him. What the trainer does is it's a physical conditioning process of getting their muscles and bones and everything ready. And you do work on the speed and conditioning of the animals. Banker had the attitude of, like I said, he was a lovable lug around the barn, but in the races, he was tough. He was tough as nails as a racehorse. I was watching the race outside of the paddock and right next to the racetrack. I was down by the half-mile pole.
Seconds after the race begins, there's a pile-up in turn 1. The chain reaction causes Banker Blue Chip Sulky to flip and catapult his driver, John Campbell, over the rail and into the infield.
John launched in the air pretty well and came down, and it looked like he straddled the hub rail. I really thought he broke his back.
Luckily, drivers are not strapped into their sulkies, so John is thrown clear and lands in a sandy area of the track that cushions his fall.
It was like landing in the beach. It couldn't have been a softer landing. I had no sore spots or aches and pains whatsoever afterwards.
After rolling over and popping back up on his feet, John watches helplessly as his horse, Banker Blue Chip, instinctively tries to continue the race without anyone guiding him.
I saw Banker was running loose on the track with the sulky trailing behind him, and I knew that was a dangerous situation.
The harness racing Hall of Famer feels it in his gut. It's just a matter of time before tragedy strikes. And then it happens. The sulky hops the rail and pulls Banker Blue Chip with it.
I've never seen a horse that fell and tumbled as violently for as long as he did.
When Banker went down and he tumbled and fell down through the light standards, I didn't see any way it was going to be okay.
John couldn't bring himself to go near Banker Blue Chip.
I thought it was a bad situation. It was something that I didn't want to see.
But Joe is one of the first on the scene.
I could see he was alive. His eyes were open. He was breathing. He was in a state of shock, and he was laying there, and there was just a panicked look on his face. He was desperately tangled up in his equipment.
When Joe and the others finally untangle the colt, they make an unbelievable discovery.
We did radiographs and a scan of the whole horse, and amazingly enough, there was one small chip in a hind ankle, but nothing very serious.
As for what saved the horse, John says it was the hobbles, the equipment designed to keep Banker Blue Chip in stride. Harness racehorses move the legs on the same side of their body in unison. To help maintain that stride, trainers use leather straps to keep their legs close together. When Banker Blue Chip fell, his legs were still strapped in the loops of the hobble, most likely preventing him from flailing and getting seriously injured.
Hobbles are put on there to keep them on stride and keep them gated the way they're supposed to be throughout the mile.
He didn't thrash, and that's probably what really helped him not get seriously injured.
Banker Blue Chip was an extremely lucky horse.
Veterinarian Celeste Coons credits not only the hobbles Banker Blue Chip was wearing, but also the way the horse fell, sideways.
It didn't go forward where horses might have injuries to their cervical vertebrae. Everything was on the side.
Since this accident, Banker Blue Chip has retired, and harness racing tracks have gotten rid of the hub rail along the inside of the track, installing flexible pylons to mark the inside boundary of the course, hopefully preventing accidents like this from ever happening again.
In the video, you can see we had a hub rail back then, and that's what caused the accident. If the hub rail was there, I couldn't move my horse in, and now, since the advent of pylons and a hubless rail, if that had happened today, I would have been able to just move my horse in, avoid the collision, and we would have been on our way, hopefully, to a victory. After replaying that over and over in my mind, Banker Blue Chip was in no way at fault. It was something that was out of his hands. He was just going about his business. He was reacting the way I wanted him to in the race. It was just unforeseen coincidence that this happened. I think it was just fluke luck that he didn't get hurt. I think any horse that did what he did again would end up with serious injuries. I think it was just his day not to be hurt.
"14-year-old Gabe Syme is scared to death. His black lab Porter has fallen through the ice and is in deep trouble.
Good boy.
He's been in there for 20 minutes. Every labored breath could be his last. With time running out, Gabe makes a desperate call for help.
Location of your emergency?
My dog is drowning in Indian Rock Lake.
Animal Control Officer Jane Trossel rushes to the frozen lake.
Porter was probably 25 feet, maybe 30 feet from the bank. It was too far for our catch pole to reach and too far for the fish net to reach. You could tell that he had been trying to get up on the ice for a while. Gabe was really frightened. You could tell that he was worried about his dog.
She and Gabe make a life and death decision. They're going in after Porter, but they don't get far.
It didn't surprise me that Gabe actually went into the ice after Porter. That didn't surprise me at all.
Gabe and Porter were inseparable. His family adopted the pup from a local animal shelter shortly after Gabe's mom died.
He's just always been a dog lover, an animal lover, and Porter's very important to him. Probably when Gabe was around 11, he was really upset one night, and I asked him what was wrong, and he was worried that dogs don't go to heaven. So he was worried about that. And I said, no, dogs do go to heaven. If you believe that, then that's where they are, and that's where they'll be when you get there.
His grandmother, Sue Syme, knew he would do anything to save his dog, even if it meant dying.
We've already had a tragedy in our family, and I don't know what I would do if something had happened to him.
Gabe and his 11-year-old lab were on a walk on an unusually warm February day in Salina, Kansas. Porter ran out on the melting ice and fell in.
He was whimpering the entire time, and you just heard a lot of, "Keep going, Porter, keep going."
Come on.
April Middleton, a reporter for the Salina Journal, is one of the first on the scene with a small video camera.
Before they'd actually called the police and before I got out there, Gabe had already been in the water at least once or twice. He was a little wet. I think he was a little cold. He was a little frantic because at this point, Porter had already been in the water for some time. He was looking pretty anxious and a little terrified and just kind of stunned by the whole thing.
Sheriff's deputies are also lakeside, but Porter is 30 feet from the shore, too far for their catch poles to reach, and no one has a rope.
Come here, Porter.
Come on, Porter.
And they've got a large tree branch, and I think they thought maybe Porter might be able to snag hold of it or something.
Jane and Gabe carefully make their way across the 3-inch thick sheet of ice. Then suddenly, now 3 lives are on the line. The water temperature is a bone-chilling 34 degrees. Neither will last long in the icy slush.
Nobody could actually reach out and grab them and pull them, so Jane was just encouraging Gabe to swim, 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 swim.
Keep swimming. Keep swimming.
And so they sort of paddle along until they get close enough to the sheriff's deputy.
Come on, grab this.
Come on. Go.
They are pulled to safety.
Come on.
It was just like nothing I felt before. It was so cold.
You all right, Gabe?
My legs went numb and my hands went numb.
Despite his own condition, Gabe's thoughts immediately go back to Porter.
Porter, is that right?
I was losing my strength and he was losing his, and I knew we were running out of time.
Hypothermia is starting to set in. His circulation has slowed. He's losing the feeling in his legs and paws. His breathing has become labored. If his temperature drops much more, his heart will stop.
he was about to give up, and his muscles are getting tired, and he was freezing. The water had froze on his fur.
Come on, Porter. You'll make it. Come on.
And I could tell that he was just so cold.
He's still in the water, still whimpering. He's been paddling the whole time, and he's sort of trying to grasp onto the edge of the broken ice with one of his paws. And at one point, you see him just sort of lay his head over, and just both of his hands go up. And at that point, it seems like everybody gets pretty frantic, because it really looks like he's just getting too tired to swim anymore.
As a last-ditch effort, a sheriff's deputy grabs an extension cord from a neighbor and tries to lasso Porter.
Damn it.
I asked him how much time a dog could stay out there, and he's like, probably not very much longer.
I personally knew that if nobody else could get Porter, Gabe was going to go back in.
Jane, a mother of 8, knows it's her or Gabe. She bravely volunteers to crawl back out on the ice.
I'll go out and swim, Tim, if I can hang on to that.
When she first said, I'll go back in, I'll crawl out there, I said, no, I should do that. And she said, no, I'm already wet, I'm gonna go. Because if I don't go, I know that Gabe will.
I'm coming.
Stay to your left. That ice is rumbling. Right, stay to your left.
With the extension cord tied around her waist, Jane shimmies out on the ice.
Porter, come here, baby.
But it starts to give way. She makes a life-saving grab for his collar.
He was swimming and helping her out, and we were pulling her.
I was just shocked. At that point, I think the cord had come off her, and she was holding onto it with her hand. And the officer was trying to pull her back in.
As Jane struggles to push Porter out of the water, Gabe jumps in to help pull Jane out. And finally, after 45 minutes, all are on solid ground.
I knew I had to do something. I knew Porter was going to give up on himself, and I knew something had to be done for the both of them.
After heating him up, Porter makes a full recovery. But it wasn't just luck. Labrador retrievers are born with a double coat, a dense undercoat for insulation, and a longer, oily outer layer that repels water and protects them from the cold for a longer period of time. At last, Gabe is reunited with his best friend.
Oh, it was awesome. It was just like I had met him for the first time again.
I was thankful that Porter was okay, but more importantly, I was thankful that my grandson was okay.
I have 8 children of my own. I would hope that if it was my children out there, that somebody would have stepped in and took control like I did.
I would risk my life if I had to again to save him.